What is going on, GBA? I am The Confusion, and welcome back to week 3 of the weekly recap. I'm sure you all know at this point that I am not alone. I am co-hosted by the amazing Zilix.
Sorry everybody, Tokes here.
And we are pretty excited to get into week 3. Last week obviously was a bit tricky for me and Zilix, so I apologize for that. Just one thing I do want to address, or I guess kind of two, before we actually jump into recapping the battles. One, the comment section is an amazing place to have conversations, and I do appreciate the feedback. It's always appreciated, always looking through that. So I do appreciate the conversations we have down there. I do want to kind of back up something I said last week, which was a big old theory going into Geo's match with Envy. I want you guys to understand that we aren't going to just sit here and go through every single turn. That's kind of pointless. You can go watch the battle if you want to see what actually happened. But the insight of looking at different perspectives is something I want to present to you guys, and I think it's important. So kind of just backing that up. Speaking of Geo though, let's just hop into our first game, which is the Detroit Steel Wings up against the San Francisco Giants. Chase bringing Thunderous Incarnate, Infernape, Cofagrigus, Donphan, Suicune, and Jirachi, and Geo bringing Toxapex, Haxorus, Mew, Dugtrio, Blacephalon, and the newly picked up Shaman. Now, before we get into the match, let's kind of look at the matchup here, because there are some interesting points that I think are worth looking at. Thunderous Incarnate is a monster, especially with the set that Chase brought. The Sub Nasty Plot set pretty much broke through the team. I mean, you guys saw, if you watched the battle, how much a +2 Gigavolt Havoc did to Shaman. I mean, it killed that thing off of, I think, 75-ish%. That's insane. There was really nothing on Geo's team that really took any sort of hit, especially with Sub and not having Ditto around. I found Thunderous to be a really big threat that I'm not sure Geo was well prepared for. It just turned out that Chase didn't use Thunderous to the best potential. So let's go into what happened first, which is Shaman was a huge offensive threat. That Life Orb made it really powerful, doing a ton of damage to the Cofagrigus early on. Now, that early damage to Cofagrigus was really important because it made things like Haxorus have a little bit of an easier time against that thing. It also forced the Healing Wish on Jirachi later on, because Chase did realize how big of an issue Haxorus could be. I mean, things like Dugtrio and the Psyshock Mew could also present some issues, so letting Cofagrigus get weakened wasn't amazing, but it wasn't his fault. He didn't really have the best answers to an offensive Shaman. He did have Jirachi, which handled it pretty well thanks to the Shuckaberry, which was, I presume, was trying to be preserved for the Dugtrio, ended up popping on the Shaman just because of how offensive that monster was. Going into it, Thundy had the chance to sub up for free, but he did double out. So this was something I was concerned about, and something I'm hoping he notices as an issue, which is the idea that when he brought in the Thundy after U-turning on the Toxapex with the Infernape, that Toxapex could do nothing. It was forced to switch out. So if he would have set up a sub and just damaged whatever came in, I mean, look at Geo's team. It's in front of your screen. Nothing took a Thunderbolt. The only thing that took a Thunderbolt was Dugtrio and Shaman, and those things did not appreciate HP Ice and couldn't really do too much damage back. I'm pretty sure the Rock Tomb on the Dugtrio was not going to do a ton of damage. The Shaman having the HP Ice, that Life Orb was knocked off, so that HP Ice wasn't killing either. So I feel like if he did set up a substitute, but instead of doubling out, he really had that option for free. So I felt like that was the smarter play. What ended up happening though was Jirachi came in on the double and Dugtrio came in on the double. Now we have Dugtrio versus Jirachi. In hindsight, I think Stealth Rocks would have been the better play, simply because it would have allowed Thundy to KO the Dugtrio. You see, the Dugtrio had a Focus Sash, so if he would have gotten rid of the Focus Sash with the Rocks also would have been enough damage for HP Ice to kill, because if you guys saw, HP Ice didn't do enough damage to kill right off the bat. I mean, it didn't even bring it down to the Sash. So in hindsight, I feel like Stealth Rocks would have helped him even more, because you saw even later on in the match that Haxorus had around 6 HP left. Having those rocks up would have hindered that thing a lot, and overall the Stealth Rocks would have made all the double switches towards the end of the game, because Suicune is Cancer. All those double switches towards the end of the game wouldn't have been so easy. Toxapex obviously handled it a little better thanks to the Regenerator. but overall I feel like rocks would have been beneficial in this scenario. Not only that, but Donphan did not have the rock, so he didn't have another opportunity and took the chance to use Healing Wish. And I don't consider that a bad play either, because Cofagrigus was really important and came into play when Mew started setting up later, and you don't know what kind of Haxorus Geo is going to bring, so I can understand Chase trying to Healing Wish up the Cofagrigus. Looking onwards, the Seed Flare miss on the Jirachi was a little important because, as you guys saw, that Earthquake was not close enough to kill the Jirachi. Seed Flare would have made it so that Jirachi could not pull off that Healing Wish, which was something to consider. I don't think it mattered too much, but having Cofagrigus in the back healthy was not beneficial to Geo because it made it harder for him to beat that thing down, because the only Pokemon on his team that really had an easy job of breaking it was Blacephalon and maybe Shaman, but without the Life Orb, Shaman was struggling too now that Cofagrigus was back at full health, so that's something to consider. Rocks killing the Dugtrio after the HP Ice kind of made it easier for him to work around the Infernape, but again with Toxapex right there, it did become increasingly difficult. Obviously, Toxapex giving him opportunities to set up, but then with Thundurus, but then again, Geo didn't really give him that opportunity all too often. Looking later on, the Z Thunderbolt, like I mentioned earlier on, killing that Shaman was devastating. I mean, Shaman did a lot of work to his team. He didn't bring the Mega Beedrill, so there wasn't much to take it out other than Infernape, and he had a clean switch in with the Toxapex, so letting that thing go down was definitely tough. But on the same note, I mean, he did, like I said before, he did not have Thundurus Ice Switch-ins at all. So that thing racking up kills very easily. We go back and forth between the Suicune, and that's pretty much how the end of this game kind of goes back and forth. The rolls, the RNG that comes along with either clicking Scald or Roar was difficult for Geo to play around, but you have to give him props. He played around it well, brought in the Haxorus and clicked Outrage at the right time after a bunch of Roars and Scalds, and the Toxapex and the Suicune is really what made this game go on forever, what it felt like. So once Haxorus came in at the right time, clicked Outrage, Blacephalon was able to come in. Another thing I want to note quickly is the Dragonium Z Suicune. I have checked with everyone, well, not everyone, but I've checked with who I'm supposed to be checking with, and that's totally okay. The way Z Crystals work is you have Z Mons that can use Z Crystals, but if you're going to use a Z Crystal as a strategy to, you know, not get tricked, I think that's really smart. Obviously, there are things like Blue Orb and Red Orb, I think, that work. That could have been, I guess, safer in essence. But if you guys are wondering, Mega Stones on a Pokemon that can't use that Mega Stone does get knocked off or tricked. So if you're saying, oh, you could have just brought a Mega, you know, Orb or whatever, Mega Stone and not get tricked, it doesn't actually work that way. You will get knocked off or tricked a Mega Stone if it's not on the right Mon. So bringing Dragonium Z, obviously, Suicune has no Dragon type moves, I think was actually really cool. Overall though, obviously a long game. Geo did not stall him out though, brought it to a clean 3-0. Zilix, what do you think of this game?
I think you summarized the whole game pretty well, but something I wanted to talk about is during the draft, a lot of people were looking at specifically Geo's team and saying, wow, you know, this is really bulky, this is really stally, are we going to see some 60-minute games or whatever? And something I just want to point out is, like, look at the Mons that he brought this week. None of them are incredibly bulky, except for obviously the Toxapex and then potentially a defensive set on Mew and Shaman. But like Haxorus, Dugtrio, Blacephalon all can be either fantastic wall breakers, revenge killers, or setup sweepers. And, you know, he may have a more zen playstyle where he takes his time with his turns and makes the safer moves, but he's definitely bringing offensive Mons.
And that you remind me of a good point, which is the Haxorus that he brought. I mean, it was so powerful that Chase was forced to sack his Donphan and not get off a Rapid Spin. And that was very big because without spinning away those rocks, Thundurus could not safely switch in on Toxapex and set up a sub. I mean, it would be forced to take a Scald, and it would lock it out of the sub range after the rock. So I think that was also really important, getting rid of the Donphan. You see that he does have some power that's worth noting because it can do a lot of damage to even defensive Pokemon like Donphan, Cofagrigus. I mean, to be fair, Chase, I feel like, brought more bulk than Geo did and still got worn out. So, I mean, that kind of makes you think about how this game played out and came down to how both players played. and the prep was kind of there to back them up. So, of course, these guys are going to be divisional matchups, so they will play once more, and I'm actually really interested to see how this game specifically is going to work out in the future.
Alright, so moving on to our next matchup, we have the San Jose Sharpedos versus the New Orleans Pelipers. The Sharpedos brought a roster of laners T, Rotom Wash, Scizor, Swallow, Alomomola, Alamalola, I don't know how to say that, and Mega Houndoom, while the Pelipers brought Tornadus T, Garchomp, Hariyama, Piloswine, Cresselia, and Tentacruel. So starting off, Pokemon, he gets up his rocks with the Piloswine, and then is able to Toxic the Rotom Wash. This will help him out a little bit throughout the game, as obviously Rotom doesn't have very great recovery outside of things like Pain Split or Leftovers, but the Toxic is going to help him out in the long run, so it was good for him to get it up early on. He is going to get a trick off, though, on the incoming Hariyama, taking its Assault Vest. Now, this is also going to be pretty important because the Rotom with the Assault Vest is going to allow it to take some hits better later on, so that will come into play, we will see. Then the Rotom Volt switches into the Landorus T, and Hariyama attempts to knock it off, revealing that the Landorus has the Z Crystal. Pokemon then tries to send in his Garchomp as the Landorus Swords Dances. Now, this is a very interesting turn that happens here because it's not very often that we see two Z moves used in the exact same turn. And Tom was a little bit worried because if the Garchomp was running a special Dragonium Z, it did have a chance of knocking out the Landorus depending on investment and all that other stuff. However, the Landorus is able to survive the Dragonium Z, and he goes for a Flyinium Z, which is able to knock out the Garchomp. Then Pokemon sends in his Tornadus to attempt to revenge kill, and Tom swaps for his Alomomola.
Just say Alomomola every single time. It'll make everyone go crazy.
He swaps into his pink fish and takes a knockoff, losing its leftovers, which will hurt, but not too bad, as obviously the Wish Fish is able to do what it does best and wish. That's a tongue twister. The Tentacruel comes out, though, as the Alomomola wishes, and then he swaps into the Rotom Wash to get the wish, while the Tentacruel Acid Sprays, dropping that special defense. And even though the special defense is dropped, the Rotom does have that Assault Vest, so it's not going to matter too much. But then Tom's able to get his Swallow in, and the Swallow is going to be very dangerous this game, as he is running a physical set with the Guts ability with the Flame Orb, so he's going to be able to put out a lot of damage, and shows right away as the Swallow is able to take out the Hariyama on the opposing side of the field. John then sends in his Piloswine to try to get a revenge kill, but obviously Tom's going to want to keep that Swallow around, and he sends in his Rotom, who's really just taking a ton of hits like a champ at this point. Then Tom is also showing that he also has this Scizor, which is going to be a huge threat. With things like the Garchomp gone, the Scizor honestly can do a ton of damage. So the Scizor comes out, and Scizor U-turns on the Tentacruel. Now this kind of reveals the EV spread on the Tentacruel to Tom, so he knows that he can start clicking Band-Aid Bullet Punch, and it's going to be doing a lot of damage. The Tentacruel's not going to be a switch in later on in the game. So then the Tentacruel Giga Drains on the Rotom, and it just shows that Assault Vest really helping out, but he's able to get the Scizor in once again, and he is able to Bullet Punch, knocking out the Tentacruel. The Cresselia then comes out, and since obviously the Scizor's banded, it can't U-turn on the Cresselia, which does kind of hurt a little bit, but Tom is able to send out his Rotom, which does finally die to the poison, and this allows him to bring in his Houndoom. And at this point, there's not too many Houndoom switch-ins. The Tornadus can take a hit or two, but it's definitely going to be able to punch holes if it decides to. However, Tom just goes for the Taunt to play it safe, and then brings in the Landorus as the Tornadus superpowers, which is enough damage to knock out the Landorus despite the resist, just because of how much damage the Garchomp was able to do to it earlier on in the battle. The Alomomola comes out, and the Alomomola actually goes for Liquidation against the Tornadus, and this kind of forces the Tornadus out so it can get the Regenerator into the Cresselia. This then brings the Houndoom back in as the Cresselia is attempting to Calm Mind, but we see the Tornadus come back, and the Houndoom actually has the Super Fang, so even if the Cresselia did try to set up Calm Minds against the Houndoom, it probably would have been able to beat it 1v1, especially with that Dark type stab. Then we see the Houndoom pick off a kill shortly after. Sorry, my bad. The Piloswine comes in to pick off the Houndoom, and then the Scizor is able to come in, U-turn on the Piloswine, taking that out, and Swallow and Tornadus come in, Swallow Facades taking out the Tornadus. The Cresselia comes in and is unable to get up a substitute, so after the Swallow dies to its burn, the Scizor is able to come in and clean up the rest of the match with a Bullet Punch, giving Tom the 2-0 victory.
Yeah, I gotta say, you cover things pretty well, and the one thing I kind of want to touch on is the fact that Tom's team not only has really good synergy, things like the Scizor, the Rotom, the Landorus, all of that has good synergy, but pairing up with the fact that all those Pokemon can run pseudo-offensive sets that you have to prepare for, or even pseudo-defensive sets, I think was tricky for John to prep for. And not only that, I feel like Tom just had the matchup straight from the get-go. So I think that's what caused John to be on the back foot majority of that game, even with the aggressive plays I felt like he made. Something else I just want to mention before we go into the next game. Forgot to mention it in the beginning. I'll put a little note. But I will be including timestamps, so for you guys that want to just skip to whichever match you want to listen into, go ahead and look in the description. I'll put it right before the coaches so you guys have easy access to that. The next game we're going to jump into is the Columbus Chew versus the San Diego Chim Chargers. Coach Z, not Coach Zed or Zen or whatever the Australians say, bringing Clefable, Porygon 2, Celebi, Mega Ampharos, Sneasel, and Excadrill. Envy bringing Tapu Koko, Mega Pinsir, Amoonguss, Gligar, and Empoleon, that core. And then the Hoopa Unbound, the monster that is Hoopa Unbound. Jumping in right away is the Koko versus the Clefable. I gotta say, the Clefable on Coach Z's team was pretty cool. It had Bolt Beam, Thunderbolt, and Ice Beam. And then I'm pretty sure it had Moonblast, didn't reveal it, but that makes sense. I did have the opportunity to talk to Coach Z about some of these sets and plays he made, so I'll be touching upon that when we get there. First off, I thought it was pretty cool. The Ice Beam and the Thunderbolt pretty much helped break Envy's core, right? Amoonguss, Gligar, and Empoleon, you would think. Though what was not working out was the fact that Ice Beam didn't 2-hit KO Amoonguss, and that's a huge issue. Looking at Coach Z's team, he has a lot of Pokemon that can run Bolt Beam. Clefable, Porygon 2, Mega Ampharos if it runs HP Ice, things can run Bolt Beam. The problem is Envy's team is so fat that Bolt Beam is not enough. You need to have powerful Bolt Beam. Things like Gligar, fine, you can run the HP Ice, but Amoonguss, HP Ice, and even Ice Beam isn't going to cover it. And Empoleon, thanks to Tapu Koko's Electric Terrain, you don't need too much power, but I think the Amoonguss is what ties that core all up together, a nice little bow. Later on though, we do have the Celebi U-turning on that Mega Pinsir, which brings in the Sneasel. Now a big play was the fact that Sneasel missed Icicle Crash for the second time this season. It's only been 3 weeks and it's the second Icicle Crash this Sneasel has missed. What that allows Envy to do is stay in, not Mega Evolve his Mega Pinsir, leave it in as regular just in case, the Icicle Crash was not going to kill it, even Banded was not going to kill, and allowed Close Combat to pretty much knock out that Sneasel and pick up its first Moxie boost. The problem I saw with that is Coach Z had a pretty, I feel like a safer switch in with Ampharos. Obviously, Sneasel could outspeed, not risk any damage except for quick attack, and pretty much kill the Mega Pinsir if it Mega Evolved. The Mega Ampharos obviously took an Earthquake if he went that route. The reason though that I feel Mega Ampharos could have been the better play was that Mega Pinsir doesn't need to Mega Evolve. So even if you got the Icicle Crash damage off, you didn't guarantee a kill if he stayed in, which is why I felt Mega Ampharos probably had a better chance. Obviously, the Thunderbolt on Mega Ampharos wouldn't have killed a regular Pinsir either, at least I don't believe, unless it was modest. Didn't do the calcs, but that's what happened. The Icicle Crash missed, unfortunately, didn't get damage off. Stealth Rocks would have picked it off if the crash happened, but it did not, which basically allowed him to get a Moxie boost. Then he switches in the Clefable, which is where I would say definitely bring in the Mega Ampharos. Spoke to him afterwards. You could check his battle. I'm pretty sure it's up at this point. The return at +1 killed. He miscalculated, didn't put in the +1 from the Moxie boost. Again, showing the benefit of not Mega Evolving. Mega Pinsir, the fact that it has Moxie and doesn't gain that flying typing right away is a huge advantage thanks to the rule. So, obviously, that Moxie boost is going to help him pick up a kill on the Clefable. Already 2 kills. and it was pretty quick. Right afterwards, the Empoleon and the Celebi are going to trade rocks as Porygon 2 comes in and sets up a Trick Room. Why, I do not know. I'm pretty sure the only Pokemon that would really abuse it is maybe that offensive Clefable and the Mega Ampharos, but the Excadrill was pretty fast, and nothing else was that offensive. His Celebi was not offensive either after I asked him for a set. It was something like Trick Room, U-Turn, Stealth Rocks, all that shenanigans. So I didn't see much for Trick Room to work out here, and instead of bringing in the Mega Ampharos on the Empoleon, he brought in the Excadrill. So that thing was forced to take a Scald under the Trick Room. He lived it, but got burned. I mean, that's a 30% chance. You can't really bank on the fact, but obviously that's unfortunate because he did miss the Icicle Crash, which was 10%. So RNG is definitely going to be a factor here. I'm sure Big Deal or No Big Deal will be covering this match for sure. But yeah, so that Excadrill took a Scald, took a burn, shook a berry on the Empoleon, made that thing's Earthquake do like nothing. It tickled that Empoleon as he was able to do a lot of damage. Defog and first set up the rocks, then defog. Now, something interesting is the fact that Empoleon did defog away Envy's rocks. Now, I think this is actually the better play than leaving rocks on the opponent's side because of the fact that Mega Pinsir was able to get another kill. You see, when the Excadrill came back in as a sack to the Mega Pinsir, if rocks were still up, that Excadrill went down. It was way below 4%, and Mega Pinsir would not have claimed that KO. But the fact that he defogged away the rocks made it so that Mega Pinsir got 3 kills this match instead of 2 without dying. So that's definitely going to help him out when it comes to the league leaders later on. So I thought that was really cool, the fact that, I don't know if he realized that, but getting rid of the rocks helped him to nab another KO. Later on, Porygon 2 cannot break the subs with the area late tri-attacks. That thing is now flying typing. It does get a 20% boost, but not the 50% boost that would come along with being stabbed. So either way, it wasn't enough to break the Hoopa Unbound. Signal Beam, maybe, next time. Signal Beam could help him out. It was Tri-Attack, unfortunately. Setting up a sub on Hoopa Bound was a great play on Envy's part because Drain Punch allowed him to recover a lot of the HP that was lost with the sub and the Life Orb, and then Hyperspace Fury pretty much killed the Celebi and the Mega Ampharos after that. One more thing that I know a lot of people are going to question is why the hell was Celebi underspeeding the Hoopa Unbound? I spoke to him. It was either a misclick on clicking Trick Room, right? Trick Room has negative priority, or just misgen. I'm pretty sure it was just misgen, wrong EVs. Again, unfortunate. A lot of things didn't go well for Coach Z. Hoping for the best in the future, but gotta give props to Envy. He 6-0'd him, and I mean, that's pretty impressive. What do you think?
So as you mentioned with the Mega Pinsir, we see this thing claim lives in almost any league it gets drafted in with the right hand, and being able to get the Moxie boost as well is going to be incredibly useful for this thing, as well as like the combination of Hoopa Unbound. There's not really any team that can switch into that safely 100% of the time, so you put both of those on the same team with a good player at the helm and you're going to see games like this. It's going to happen. There's not really much else to say about the battle other than I think the pseudo trick room on the Choose side was a little bit weird, but I'm sure there was a plan there.
Oh, actually, so just about that, I did manage to also talk to him about the fact that he had a Smooth Rock Sandstorm Sneasel. So that thing was able to set up the... Yeah, I know. Something very interesting. So he could have set up the sand and potentially had a field day there, because Excadrill did actually look like it had a decent matchup, I'm not going to lie. Though things like Gligar were still around, so interesting, but didn't come into play.
Yeah, that... I did not know Sneasel got Sandstorm. That could have been very interesting. Unfortunately, we didn't get the chance to see that happen, but wow. Okay then, moving into our next match, we have a very interesting one here. The Philadelphia Scizors versus the Florida Gators. The Scizors brought a team of Nihilego, Greninja, Uxie, Magnezone, Victini, and Cloyster, while the Gators have Mamoswine, Superior, Floatzel, Buzzwole, Klefki, and Crobat. Before I get into this match, I would highly recommend watching both sides of this battle. This battle was a very entertaining one on both sides. It really came down to the wire, and it was back and forth probably the whole time. So definitely one to watch. If you guys may have missed it, I would go watch it. So anyways, getting into the battle, both Chimp and Gator set up their rocks right away, and it's the Uxie versus the Mamoswine. They trade a bit of a damage with Icicle Crash and Psychic. Chimp will come out on top of this exchange since his Uxie will knock out the Mamo with 3 Psychics. However, the Mamoswine gets the flinch on the 3rd Icicle Crash and then will go on to connect with the 4th Icicle Crash. If only the Chew had this luck with Icicle Crashes, knocking out the Uxie. Chimp is able to revenge kill with Greninja, but losing his ground immunity in one of his bulky mons that early hurts pretty bad. Gator will bring out his Superior, which does lure in the Victini as he doubles into his Floatzel. This will force Chimp to switch, and he does, into his Cloyster. Chimp then assumes that he can't be knocked out here, and he'll be able to Rapid Spin away the rocks. However, Gator's running Hidden Power and will be able to take the Cloyster down. Start of this battle has gone very well for Gator and has set Chimp back a few steps. Because now things like Victini are crippled due to the rocks remaining on the field, and Chimp, knowing that he's behind, he brings in his Greninja and Dark Pulses the incoming Buzzwole. He then makes a bold play despite fearing a potential Choice Scarf and uses Greninja's Z move to knock out the Buzzwole. Gator, however, did expect his Buzzwole to go down here to the Greninja, and he sends out his Superior, which is able to Leaf Storm the incoming Victini, revealing that the Victini is carrying the Assault Vest. Gator then sends out his Floatzel, which is barely able to hang on after Victini blue flares, allowing the Floatzel to get off one more attack against the Greninja before going down to the Life Orb recoil. Gator views this as an opportunity to set up his spikes, knowing that the Magnezone will be able to trap his Klefki. Chimp views the trapping as an opportunity to get at least 2 kills with his Magnezone, as he is able to set up a substitute, which the Klefki struggles to break, and the Klefki is able to get up all 3 layers of spikes before the Magnezone is able to knock it out after setting up a brand new substitute. So behind a fresh substitute, Chimp assumes that he's able to knock out at least 1 more Mon or do an incredible amount of damage. However, Gator sends out his Crobat, and Chimp assumes he can knock it out here, but the Crobat is running the Infiltrator ability, and Gator goes for the Hidden Power Ground to get the KO on the Magnezone. Things really are not looking great for Chimpact here, as most of his team will die to hazards at this point, and Gator has Hidden Power Ground on both the Crobat and the Superior to be able to deal with the Nihilego. However, Chimp has the amazing bring of Salt Vest on his Nihilego, allowing it to knock out the Crobat, surviving that HP ground, and then he's barely able to survive another HP ground from the Scarf Superior on 5 HP, giving Chimpact the 3-0 victory. As I mentioned at the start though, it was incredibly close. Despite it being a 3-0, had the Superior gotten the knockout on the Nihilego, it would have been a win for Gator. So it says 3-0, but in reality it was closer to like a 1-0, but obviously Chimp did preserve the Victini and the Greninja from switching in from the hazards.
Yeah, what a crazy game to watch. Chimpact and Gator going down was crazy. Gator taking an L, unfortunately, but the way Chimpact played was very well. And let me tell you, I don't think there's any other Pokemon in which you can click Hidden Power, a 4 times effective Hidden Power twice, and still knock out that Pokemon. So really impressive on Nihilego's point. But yeah, overall a really great match. Just like Zilix said, I recommend you guys heading over and watching that if you have not already. I'm sure you guys already have. Going to the next match we have here, it's the Borussia Donphan Lars up against the Melbourne Rotoms and Cybertron. Lars bringing Kyurem Black, Tornadus Incarnate, Tapu Fini, Cobalion, Mega Manectric, and Lurantis. Cybertron bringing the Mimikyu, Kartana, Mega Swampert, Ludicolo, Porygon Z, and the Pelipper. Now, right before we get into this match, I do want to mention a few things. Cybertron, I have to say, is getting better, right? He's taking his time. I mean, if you watch his week 1 match and then watch this match, you'll see the difference. It's black and white. The fact that he was taking a little bit more time, the fact that he was calcing somewhat, I'll mention where, you know, if he actually did do some more calcs, he maybe would have played a little better. But overall, I think he is improving. Another thing on Cybertron's end is the fact that he really doesn't have good hazards, and a huge problem within this game is Lars had no problem switching around things like Kyurem Black, Mega Manectric, Lurantis, Tornadus. I mean, having rocks, and you have a rock setter in Mega Swampert, obviously. It's hard to tech on rocks on such an offensive and potent sweeper, but you have to keep that in mind. Hazards are important, and he doesn't have the best way to set them up, but people might take advantage of that, so that's just my little message to Cybertron. Starting off the game, we have Tornadus Incarnate, a Pokemon you don't see much in the League format, up against Mimikyu, able to U-turn out and break that thing's disguise turn 1. Huge. I mean, breaking a disguise is something a lot of people struggle with because late game, that can do a lot of work. It did a lot of work early on though, because Mimikyu is able to SD and 2-hit KO the Tapu Fini with a combination of a Shadow Claw and a Play Rough. Again, playing it safer, I agree, is something a lot of VGC players, you'll see them do. Play a little safer, which sometimes will work out and sometimes won't. The next big thing you're going to see is the Cobalion is able to hit Pelipper with a Volt Switch. Now, Volt Switch is a pretty common attack on Cobalion if it's not the SD set. On a more defensive set, you'll see Volt Switch. And that's, again, just comes back to the lack of knowledge that Cybertron has. It's not his fault. He's not, you know, very knowledgeable in the League format. A lot of the hidden tech and common moves you see in the League format are not what you see in singles or even VGC. But again, that just has to do with doing some more homework and protecting Pelipper at all costs. I cannot, you know, pressure that enough because it makes it so much easier to handle rain if Pelipper's not around. So making sure Pelipper is around, even if Pokemon are weak, help you out a ton. So doing a lot of damage to the Pelipper was dangerous, and I'll explain why all that damage mattered later on in the match. This next thing that happened is Mega Swampert up against this Cobalion. Now, the reason I found this really big is because he could have predicted the Lurantis. Instead, he clicked EQ, safe EQ, and the Lurantis came in and pretty much ate that hit. The reason I say it was a pretty safe prediction, it wasn't any high risk, is because if you actually did the calc, a modest... Oh, it wasn't against the Cobalion, my bad. It was against the Mega Manectric. Mega Manectric against Mega Swampert. The reason I feel like clicking Ice Punch was safer than clicking EQ was because even if Mega Manectric was carrying the HP Grass, even if your Mega Swampert had no bulk investment, and even if his Mega Manectric was modest 252, if you looked at the calc, it only did up to 98% max. You lived it, and that's worst case scenario. So just doing some more calcs and seeing if it's worth making those risks could have helped him out, but regardless, it gave Lars a pretty easy switch into the Lurantis. And at that point, Lurantis pretty much has a free Leaf Storm. If you watch Lars Team Builder, he was right. Leaf Storm is completely free. Any grass move, really. Especially with all the water types on the team. And the main grass switch-in being so specially frail, being his Kartana. Unfortunately, the Leaf Storm on the incoming Ludicolo, Assault Vest Ludicolo, does miss. I will say this is important, and I'll explain in just a moment. Though later on, Ludicolo scalds the Kyurem Black on the switch, and then Kyurem Black clicks Ice Beam twice on a Mega Swampert. Now, the Mega Swampert should have outsped the Kyurem Black in the rain, clicked Power Punch, and then EQ'd or Waterfall. It really did anything after a Power Punch. Unfortunately, though, the Kyurem Black was scarfed and outsped the Mega Swampert in the rain, showing how little speed investment that Mega Swampert had. I mean, again, just something that comes down to team building and making sure that your rain sweepers are fast enough, speedy enough, and are invested enough to take on any scarfers that your opponent might have. So that was a little bit unfortunate on that end. We do see throughout the match that Assault Vest Ludicolo is able to take a lot of hits from things like the Mega Manectric, Cobalion's Volt Switch, Kyurem Black's Ice Beam, and the Lurantis' Leaf Storm. Unfortunately, though, Ludicolo can only take so much damage and takes a crit Ice Beam from the Kyurem Black. Now, this was a really big play and also not that big of a play, and I'll explain. The reason it was really big was the fact that Ludicolo could have just killed that Kyurem Black without the crit, and keeping around Ludicolo even at such a low HP was amazing because the Borussia Donphan had zero priority on their team at that point, and having Ludicolo in the rain to do so much damage, especially with Kyurem Black being so weak, could have been very big. The reason I say it's not that big is because if you guys remember, that Leaf Storm did miss early on that Ludicolo, and it would have made that crit null and void. Even without the crit, if that Leaf Storm landed early on, then it really didn't matter. So in hindsight, if you think about it, yes, the Ice Beam crit was really big, but then again, if Lars just landed his Leaf Storm early on, it wouldn't actually have mattered. So that's something to take note of. One of the last things I do want to mention here is the fact that Cobalion got up rocks as Cybertron switched out his Pelipper into Mega Swampert. And I'm going to call this a misplay. So, the reason I say this is a misplay is because you got to look at your cons and your pros. What was the cons of switching out the Pelipper for the Mega Swampert? Well, if you do that and he predicts you, you lose your Pelipper to the Stealth Rocks that he had already set up. And if he clicks the pretty safe close combat, you also lose your Mega Swampert. So you lose your Rain Setter, and you lose your last Rain Abuser. Not only that, but losing Mega Swampert loses your only reliable Cobalion killer. Now on the other hand, staying in, what would have happened? Okay, you lose Pelipper to the close combat or the Volt Switch regardless, and you still have your Mega Swampert. So the safer play was to just stay in with Pelipper. It was gonna die anyway because of the Stealth Rocks. So there's really no point in risking your Mega Swampert. It just seemed unnecessary to me. Because after that, Cobalion came in late game and pretty much cleaned up under the Tailwind. Cybertron, trying to pull it back, made some very good plays, switching between his Mimikyu for the close combat and Kartana for the Iron Head. Just wasn't enough. Cobalion had enough damage output and bulk to take hits. The Bloom Doom from the Kartana did not have Sacred Sword. All around, I think Lars played this game really well, but again, if Cybertron prepares a little better next time, I think he also has a very good fighting chance. What do you think about it, Zilix?
I think it's good to see Aaron, adapting a bit more as, the weeks go on, and maybe towards the end of the season, we'll start seeing him getting potentially convincing wins or, better differentials overall. But right now, as you mentioned, it is going to take a little bit more time probably to get used to different things. Cobalion really put in work this game though, regardless. It just has the power to kill a lot of the mons on Aaron's team with a bit of prior damage. And obviously things like the Kyurem, the Mega Manetric, they can provide that prior damage. So that's just how the cookie crumbled that week. Moving on to our next battle, we have the Montreal Habsols and the Milwaukee Bewares. The Habsols have a roster of Megalopony, Zoroark, Darmanitan, Mudsdale, Zapdos, and Scolipede, while the Bewares have the Garchomp. Now this is Mega Garchomp, but he didn't Mega it, which is why I just have it listed as Garchomp, Muck, the Alolan Muck, Jellicent, Xurkitree, Bronzong, and Forgus. So, before we get into this match, a couple things need to get out of the way. There was a lot of random hacks throughout this battle. I'm sure a lot of it did matter. I'm sure a lot of it didn't matter. It might get covered on Big Deal, No Big Deal. So if you guys are curious, check it out there or listen to the coach's opinion on it. I'm not going to be talking about too much of it except for some of the stuff that was a little bit more obvious where it did or didn't matter. So, getting into the battle, starting off both sides, just do a little bit of switching and hazard setting, chip damage on both sides, leading to the point where the Zoroark comes in disguised as Darmanitan. Wolfie believes it to be the Darmanitan and goes directly into his Jellicent, which does take a huge hit from Dark Pulse. Fortunately for Wolfie though, he is able to get that cursed body, which will prevent another Dark Pulse from coming out, and it allows him to recover most of his health back as Aster sends in the Zapdos to defog the rocks away on the incoming Muck. The Zapdos then Volt switches out into the Mudsdale, which does lose its item, and at this point the Mudsdale is getting kind of low on HP since it lost its leftovers, and it's just getting chipped down over time. Both sides do set up their rocks again despite the defog, and Aster is able to get in his Darmanitan against the Bronzong. He goes for a Flare Blitz, doing a huge chunk of damage to the un-Mega Evolved Garchomp. However, since it isn't Mega Evolved yet, the Darmanitan is forced to swap, otherwise the Garchomp would be able to outspeed. Wolfie decided to go for the Rock Slide, as had he gone for the Earthquake and the Zapdos came out, then obviously that wouldn't have worked, but the Rock Slide works on both the Darmanitan and the Zapdos, and he is able to get a lucky flinch on that Zapdos, which will allow the Garchomp to take it out. Had the flinch not happened, the Zapdos would have been able to either roost or take out the Garchomp, and then could have defogged the rocks away later on in the battle, so that flinch did kind of suck for Aster. So then Wolfie used the Outrage to take out the Zapdos, and since he's locked into Outrage, Aster pretty much has a free opportunity to go into his Megalopony and knock out the Garchomp with a power-up punch because it's low enough on HP, and then do a big chunk of damage or potentially knock out whatever comes in. However, Aster sends in his Lopunny and then has the afterthought of, oh, regular Garchomp is faster than non-Mega Evolved Lopunny. I guess he forgot that whenever something Mega Evolves, it gets its speed right away, because he goes into his Mudsdale, losing it to the Outrage, and then realizing that the Lopunny actually does outspeed, and he then sends in the Lopunny to take out the Garchomp. So this was a really big misplay. Obviously, mistakes happen, but this one was pretty bad. I don't know why Aster had the sudden thought that he was slower, and then he didn't double check before losing the Mudsdale. He probably could have gone into the Lopunny, checked to see the speed, and then gone into the Mudsdale afterwards if the speed wasn't right, but he did realize that the speed was right, and ended up losing his Mudsdale for no reason. But regardless of that, the Lopunny is able to get a power-up punch on the incoming Bronzong, taking Rocky Helmet damage. The Lopunny then swaps for the Zoroark and U-turns on Wolfie's incoming Muck to the Darmanitan. Wolfie has to sack off his Garchomp here. It dies to the rocks, and then he brings in his Jellicent to set up the Trick Room. Once the Trick Room is set up, the Jellicent is able to take out the Darmanitan, and Aster attempts to revenge with his Zoroark, but Wolfie is going to preserve it and go into his Forgus. Then Wolfie makes a bit of an interesting play here. He brings in his Xurkitree to set up the Z Electric Terrain. However, Aster just stays in and clicks the Dark Pulse, and this makes Xurkitree lose a huge amount of HP. Had he preserved his Xurkitree better, or if he just stayed in with the Forgus and clicked Moonblast, the Zoroark would have been gone and the Xurkitree would have been at full health. But the Xurkitree is going to be able to knock out the Zoroark because it is in the Trick Room, and the Zoroark, I believe, had the Choice Scarf. So the Xurkitree is able to knock it out, but Wolfie's plan was he was hoping that the Zoroark would switch out, and then he could go for the Z Electric Terrain to get the speed boost, and then the Trick Room would go away. He would be faster than the rest of his team and could potentially sweep with the Beast Boosting Xurkitree. However, that was not able to happen because of the big damage he took from the Zoroark, preventing him from setting up that Z terrain. So the Lopunny is able to take it out with a power-up punch. Wolfie then makes a big misplay going into Forgus. He assumed it could live. It was either a miscalc or maybe he didn't take into account the power-up punch, but he does go down to the return. The Bronzong comes out to revenge. However, it gets crit from Lopunny's return. Now, in the moment, Wolfie thought that this mattered a lot because had the Scolipede gone for a Mega Horn, it had the potential of knocking out after the crit. However, the Scolipede is sent in and goes for the Throat Chop, which I believe would have knocked out the Bronzong regardless of the crit, so it didn't really matter there. Then a really interesting set of plays happen here. So Wolfie assumes that the Scolipede is some item unknown and has Earthquake coverage. Now, if the Scolipede has the Earthquake coverage, he's pretty much guaranteed the win unless Wolfie is able to get the Curse Body with the Jellicent. So what Wolfie does is he goes into his Muck and then doubles into the Jellicent to try to get the Curse Body on the Earthquake, but Aster just goes for the Throat Chop again. Now, Wolfie is assuming that the Scolipede might be Banded Throat Chop, and pretty much Wolfie wins because the only attack that the Scolipede can really go for is that Throat Chop, which the Alolan Muck has no problem winning, or surviving against and being able to win versus that Scolipede. So I don't really know why Aster brought Mono Dark attacking on a Scolipede. A 3-attack Life Orb set would have done much better. Obviously, hindsight, he would have won the game with that, but even just looking at Wolfie's team, the Scolipede with 3 attacks would have done very well this week. So I don't know, he didn't upload a team builder, so I didn't get the chance to see why he would have brought it, but it is what it is. He, I guess, had the wrong set for the week, and the end of the match was actually kind of funny because they thought that they were both confused by what was happening in the last couple turns because obviously they didn't know each other's sets. So it's definitely worth watching the ends of those battles if you don't want to watch the whole thing, because it was kind of funny at the end there.
Yeah, I have to say, I think this game is a perfect example of team prep, right? You don't know exactly what your opponent is going to bring, and as you saw, both teams were confused. So if you're new to the format, I think watching this battle you can learn a lot, because when it comes to team prep, you kind of build funky sets that you feel will work better, right? He brought things like Spikes, Throat Chop, because he felt like that was, you know, what was going to help him out more than the Life Orb, whatever set. So I think it came down to the fact that it's hard to prep for everything, and you don't know exactly which set of 6 your opponent is going to bring. So in hindsight, right, you look at the team and said, wow, Scolipede actually rips through the team. But I'm sure he had other Pokemon on the team that would have made it more difficult for him to say, I'm going to bring this. So again, it's hindsight. It comes down to team prep, and if you want to kind of see how important that can be, and you got to get into your opponent's head because you don't know exactly what your opponent is going to bring, regardless of the 11 or 12 Pokemon they have, then I think that's something very important. One more thing I want to mention about this game is how well he played with Zoroark, regardless of his loss. I mean, Wolfie was smart about the Zoroark, and a lot of players usually aren't, so I have to give props to Wolfie for that, playing around the Zoroark. He did well with that, but I also have to give props to Aster. Props to Aster, because the way he played with Zoroark was really well. And if you guys looked at the bold predictions video, I predicted that Zoroark was going to do very well in terms of kills, because I know I've used it in the past, in which things like Swords Dance, Nasty Plot, Scarfed Bandit, Specs, I mean, this thing has a lot of options, as well as the U-turn. So I have a feeling it can do really well, especially when you can disguise it as something and pretty much pick off kills very easily, because you're forcing your opponent to go into Pokemon the same way he forced Wolfie to go into his Jellicent and take a really powerful Dark Pulse, because the Darmanitan was just too big of a threat. So I think he played well with Zoroark, and if he plays a little better with it in the future, I think he has great potential to do a lot with it. Going into the next match here, we have the Kansas City Jirachiefs up against the Bronze Bearticks. TTM Jolt, bringing Mega Venusaur and Breloom. That dual grass core you're going to see is very important in this match. Celesteela, Hydreigon, Aerodactyl, and Gardevoir. And Joey bringing Mega Gyarados, Zygarde 50%, Whimsicott, Accelgor, Heracross, and Miltank. Now, right off the bat, let me talk about a few things. One is the way Joey has been prepping. Now, this isn't to knock on Joey. He's very good and has proven himself. The problem I have with his prep starting, looking at it now that it's week 3, is it's very easy to kind of see what kind of playstyle he's going for. I mean, he's brought the similar defensive rest, Zygardes, and Mega Gyarados pretty much week to week. He has the ability to change that, but you can tell that he likes to bring bulky setup. And the fact that he has brought a very similar Accelgor set, obviously the Heracross, the Miltank, and the Whimsicott were all different. It's the idea that you kind of have to toy around with different things, and I'm sure it looked good in the scenario, but those two grass types on Jolt's end, which is what I want to get into now, the way he built those was easier with the Mega Venusaur, but I think very smart with the Breloom, showing you how Jolt knows how to prep specifically for a team. And the bulk up Breloom with Facade and the Toxic Orb was a beautiful set. So, let's just get into this game. The first up, turn 1, was the Accelgor versus the Celesteela. Accelgor is able to manage a Spike Up, which will stay there the whole game, to note. And the Heavy Slam does bring that thing down to the Sash, while later on, well, a couple turns later, Miltank and Aerodactyl switch Rocks up and Toxics. Rocks is more important, I feel, for Joey on his end, because it makes the Accelgor go down, weakens the Heracross a bit, and the Mega Gyarados has to take the 25%, which makes it harder because it's a bulky set, which needs to rely on resting. So I thought that initial damage was going to be important, more so than the damage on the Jirachief's team, which really only affected the Aerodactyl. Looking into the rest of the game, we have a strong play with the block. Now, Joey did not go for the block on the Celesteela, which I personally understand. Obviously, he had a plan to trap in that Celesteela, make it easier for things like Whimsicott and especially Heracross to do some major damage. The fact is, he predicted him to switch out into one of the two grass types, and he ended up just clicking 1,000 Arrows, which forced a Toxic. Now, the Toxic wasn't that big of a play. It was more the fact that he couldn't go for the block now because he switched into Mega Venusaur, since he was now grounded with Celesteela, and the 1,000 Arrows would have done a ton of damage. The thing is, Zygarde is not carrying Sleep Talk, and neither is it carrying any other coverage aside from 1,000 Arrows, if I remember correctly. Things like Coil and Rest. So the problem was the Mega Venusaur had a very easy time just clicking HP Ice and getting it to a KO, while without Sleep Talk, Rest was not able to heal him up enough to the point where he could survive the 2 HP Ices right after. So essentially, he was really just forced to switch out, only getting a little bit of damage on that Celesteela. Mega Venusaur having a lot of good potential here because of the Sludge Bomb spam. I mean, you saw it killed the Miltank after, it was whittled down from the Aerodactyl's Toxic, and overall the Toxic spam on towards Joey's team made it a lot easier for Jill to bring in things like Breloom, for example, and really just click Facade on something and pretty much bring it down to very little health. I mean, you saw that's what happened with the Whimsicott. Normally, Whimsicott is a very clean answer, but in the Draft League format, he could have brought things like Sludge Bomb. He decided to bring Facade, and it worked out beautifully because he managed to still bring the defensive set and still tack on a 140 neutral attack to hit that Whimsicott. Whimsicott does not have the best defenses, so whittling that thing down, rocks, making it so that it had to take 2 turns of rocks, so Mach Punch kills later was also really big. It 1v1 the Mega Gyarados, because the Mega Gyarados was really only setting up its attack and its speed, while the Breloom was raising its attack and its defense. So it was matching the attack raise Mega Gyarados was doing, but Mega Gyarados was not matching the attack raise the Breloom was doing, because the defense allows it to take more hits from the Mega Gyarados, but Mega Gyarados, when it sets up, is not raising its defense. So it worked out much better for the Breloom and for Jolt than it did for Joey and Mega Gyarados. Something else I want to talk about is taking a look at my notes. Overall, just the fact that he had a very good check to a lot of Pokemon in terms of Gardevoir. I think Specs Gardevoir had a very clean matchup, and the natural build of Jolt's team made it so that none of these bulky setup sweepers had opportunities to set up. And that's why I said early on that there's a problem with how Joey is starting to build these teams. It's where things like roar phasing, the right coverage, just the right Pokemon can stop half of these Mons, and you really need to build more meticulously if you want to use those sets to a greater potential. And I think he had a good opportunity this match, and I don't think Joey made any mistakes in bringing these sets. It was more the fact that Jolt caught on to that and prepared his team to not sacrifice to those sets. So not a knock on Joey, more a prop to Jolt in the way he built his team to handle it. And then later on, Bulk Up Breloom just doing a ton of work. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Zilix.
The Breloom set, everything about it was great. I am a huge fan of Breloom, and I've never really seen it used in Draft League format too often. I've seen it draft a couple times, but normally people just use it as like a sash lead with like Mach Punch and stuff. But Bulk Up Breloom Facade is just great. It's great. But yeah, moving on to our next and final matchup this week, we have Monotui in the Tampa Bay Luxrays and Necrostevo in the Victorian Shadows. The Luxrays have a team of Mega Charizard X, Comfey, Registeel, Gliscor, Keldeo, and Weavile, while the Shadows brought Tyranitar, Diggersby, Rotom Heat, Lycanroc, Sun, Araquanid, and Mega Alakazam. So here we have a match that probably took a lot longer than it should have, but this was mainly due to Mono making very safe plays towards the end of the battle to ensure that he would be able to win despite having a very rocky start towards the beginning of the battle. So let's break it down and see what happened. Starting off, we see the Charizard against the Araquanid. The Charizard has the Mega Evolution Stone this time and is able to Mega, getting big damage off against that Araquanid, but the Araquanid is able to fire back with the Liquidation, also doing quite a lot of HP to the Charizard. Mono not wanting to lose his Charizard this early, he goes into the Keldeo, which will be able to take the Liquidation hits. However, Necrostevo predicts the Charizard to switch out and sets up these Sticky Webs. Keldeo here goes for the Hydro Pump, which was a misplay, and you will see why momentarily, because normally the Keldeo would be able to take out that Araquanid with 2 Hydro Pumps. However, he is going to miss 2 Hydro Pumps. He only hit 1. Had he gone for the Secret Sword, he would have been able to, I believe, do more damage, but I think Mono said that he was fearing potentially defensive Rotom from coming in, and he didn't want the Rotom to come in and Volt Switch on the Keldeo, so if he went for the Hydro Pump, obviously the Rotom would not be able to do that for free. So the Keldeo is going to go down to the Araquanid due to missing the Hydro Pumps. Mono then sends in his Weavile to knock out that Araquanid, and this brings in the Rotom Heat. Mono sees this as an opportunity to heal up his Charizard, as normally the Charizard would be able to take hits from the Rotom. However, this Rotom is very special as it's running the Foul Play, and he is able to knock out that Charizard due to the Sticky Webs reducing its speed. It's not able to get the Roost off, and the Foul Play goes off to take it down. This is not looking good for Mono. He's lost his Keldeo, he's lost his Charizard. So these These two mons are going to be important, but they're not going to be able to be used since they went down so early. So he knows he has to start doing something to pull things into his direction. So he sends in his Comfey to defog away the webs and the reflect that the Rotom was able to set up. And he also begins to set up Calm Minds versus the Mega Alakazam. Now this will allow him to 1v1 the Alakazam because he is running a very defensive set, and obviously the Calm Mind boost will allow him to take the Psychics better from the Alakazam, and the priority healing will make it so it doesn't matter that the Alakazam outspeeds, because whenever Mono needs to heal, he could do that with the priority. So Necro swaps out his Alakazam knowing that it's a losing battle for the Tyranitar, which does take a lot of damage due to the Draining Kiss. And then Necrostevo brings in his Diggersby to try to get damage off against his Comfey, but the Comfey is so physically defensive, it's able to take the hit from the Diggersby and do enough damage so that the Diggersby is able to knock itself out with the Life Orb recoil. Necrostevo now sends in his Lycanroc and goes for the Z move to finally get rid of the Comfey that was causing his team a lot of trouble. Mono then sends in his Gliscor and is able to Toxic the incoming Rotom. This will help him out a lot in the long run, as there's going to be a point in time where this Rotom is going to need to die, and the Toxic is going to help ensure that that happens. Eventually, the Alakazam comes back in, and Mono makes a very risky play, sending out his Weavile against that Alakazam, and it does work out for him as the Alakazam did go for the Psychic attack. However, the Shadows are carrying the Signal Beam, so they don't have to worry about a potential Focus Blast miss, and they are able to take out that Weavile with the Signal Beam. This leaves Mono down to his Registeel and Gliscor. Both Mons, however, are able to take on the rest of Necro's team, but he's going to have to play very carefully to pull ahead of the battle. So to speed up the process and just explain overall what happens here, Mono needs to set up rocks, which he was able to do. He has to stall out the Reflect turns because the Rotom is setting up the Reflect. He's able to do that as well. He also needs to kill the Rotom to prevent the Reflect from being set back up, and a potential defog if it happens to be running that, which he is able to get that down as well. Then once the Rotom dies and the Reflect was gone, he needs to make sure that his Gliscor was at full HP, absolutely full HP, to be able to potentially live a hit from the Alakazam, since Necrostevo wasn't really ever to send in his Alakazam safely while also ensuring the knockout on the Gliscor. Mono is able to win the battle 2-0 after many turns of roosting and wearing down the rest of Necro's team.
Yeah, I think this game was interesting in the sense that the way they played with such auto Pokemon like Comfey, I mean, Comfey being such a big threat, right? It's not, you know, too often you see Comfey do well in the league format, obviously, but it can. I mean, the Calm Line sets are dangerous, and the +3 Draining Kisses outspeeding things like potential fake outs, extreme speeds, and just regular priority moves makes it very useful. Like, if he brought a Accelerock on the Lycanroc, that wouldn't have mattered. So I think the way he Mono 2 played with the Comfey was really cool, but also the way that Necro played, I don't think his record shows the way that he plays. I think he's a smart battler, and I'm sure he's going to pick up some wins soon. It's just the way this match played out for him didn't really work out. Obviously, some misplays with bringing in the Diggersby rather than the Lycanroc on the Comfey was a little bit of an issue, but overall, I think he did play well enough. It was just the lack of the coverage to really break down things like Gliscor and Registeel, pretty much just like you said. I think it was funny, though, that he ran Confusion on his Mega Alakazam. Shout out to me as a Jenning mistake. Not a Jenning. I think he actually breeds Osmons, so he just kind of left that on by accident. Forget to put on Focus Blast. Could have helped him. Just thought it was funny. But yeah, overall, an interesting match.
Yeah, for sure. It does... About the Comfey again, it does kind of look weird on paper because, you know, when going up against a Sand team with 2 rock types, something like the Rotom, which resists it, and the Araquanid has incredibly high special defense, the Mega Alakazam has very good special defense. It doesn't look good on paper, but it ended up working out because that priority attacks were just what he needed, and obviously the priority healing as well. So yeah, weird set, but it did end up working out for him. So with all the matches covered, let's take a look at our conference breakdown. Ula looking pretty MV dominant right there. I mean, he's the only person with over 2 wins in that division right now, with the +13 differential, really knocking down the Columbus 2 with their -14. Melee looking kind of close. Obviously, Gator and Wolfie are tied there with 2-1 plus 4. Chimp pulling way ahead while Aster is falling a bit behind there. We have the Pony division, also pretty similar story to the Ula Ula, although not as much as the Borussia Donphan are doing pretty well there as well. But the Melbourne Rotoms and Bronx Bearticks. Bronx Bearticks is probably not a team that people would expect to be this far behind this early on. But Joey is a great battler, so he most likely will be able to pull up in the rankings. But if not, he's definitely does not want to start out this far behind. Then looking at Akala, probably the closest one so far, with the Tampa Bay Lux Rays at the lead. Not far behind is the San Jose Sharpedos. And then also we have the New Orleans Pelipers and the Victorian Shadows beneath the two.
Yeah, I have to say, when you look at the way these teams are starting to fall out, again, only week 3, all of this can change. I think what's funny, though, is the 3 at the top, right? There are 3 teams undefeated, right? Chimp and his Scissors, Envy and his Gym Chargers, and then Jolt and his Jira Chiefs. Though that is going to change because next week, Envy, I believe, faces Jolt. So one of them is going to have to lose. So we're going to be left with potentially 2, and at the very least 1 person still with 3-0, or 4-0, 4-0, right? Yeah. 4-0 by next week. So it could be 2 at the most, if Chimp picks up a win, and then 1 at the slightest because someone has to win between Envy and Jolt. So I think that's going to be exciting to see. Obviously, at the bottom 3, we've got Chew, and Coach Z, Absols, and Aster. And then we have the Shadows with Necro Stevo. All 3, well, 2 I know for sure can do better. I don't know Coach Z and how he's played in the past, so I can only hope that
anyone know Coach Z?
I have no idea, but I'm hoping he can play better. I like his team in a sense, and I'm hoping it can. I'm hoping it's hope. I'm hoping he can do better. Aster, I know from experience how he's very experienced. He knows what he's doing. Same with Necro Stevo. I've seen him play elsewhere, and he does do well as well. So I'm sure we have such a competitive field here that most of this can change within a week or 2. So I'm excited to see how this continues to develop. Last up, though, we have our league leaders, the Pokemon that are dominating the league in terms of kills and lack of deaths. Looking at our number 1 spot, we have Mega Pinsir, coached by Envy. I mean, look at that thing, 9 kills. So far, nothing in the double digits, but I mean, that's 3 kills per game. That's an average of 3 per game. That's half a team every single game. I mean, think about that. That's very, very cool. And then also the fact that it has not died. So props to Envy. He's using that thing very well. Nihilego and Chimp. Nihilego also proving to be very, very good in the hands of Chimp. He's been using that thing amazingly, taking advantage of the way that thing is spread out with bulk, beast boost, and his special attack. All around, very impressed with how he's using that. And of course, no one, is surprised to see the Detroit Steelings up in the league leaders, using Thunderous very well. Even though he took a loss, nabbing, I believe, 3 kills, sitting up there with 8 and 2. Just has a little bit more deaths than the Nihilego, which is why it's at number 3, but still top 3 is very impressive. Looking at 4 through 10, we have the Xurkitree, the Cobalion, and the Swellow. Xurkitree with 6 kills, Cobalion, Swellow with 5, Weavile, and Haxorus with 5, and then Snorlax and Zygarde 10% with 4. So all of these Pokemon, not surprised at all. The fact that Zygarde Doggo is still here, and now it has a team too, because if you guys checked out earlier in the week, it was picked up. So Zygarde is not sitting on the board alone. Chimp has given it a very nice home. But yeah, things like Haxorus, Weavile, Swellow, not surprised at all. If it wasn't for last season, I would say I'm surprised to see Cobalion. But if any of you remember, last season Cobalion was number 1 in terms of league killers in Season 7. So honestly, not surprised at all to see Cobalion up here, like at all. And then obviously seeing Xurkitree up here along with Nihilego being the 2 Pokemon that are representing the Beast Boosters is pretty cool. What do you think?
So one very important thing that I want to mention is the Zygarde 10%. Now, my bold prediction, one of them, was that a Mon would be dropped and then picked up and enter the top 5 kills. Ooh. So this adopted dog here if Chimp is able to get it into the top 5 kills by the end of the season, then my bold prediction will come true.
Wow.
So Chimp, if you are listening, get this thing to top 5, and I will be a very happy analyst.
Yeah, that's actually crazy to think about. I mean, that seems to be working out pretty well right now. I mean, it has a good amount of kills, and I feel like there's always potential for Zygarde 10% to put in work, just because of the fact that it has no answers other than grass types. So yeah, really cool to see how this is playing out. If you guys are excited for week 4 of the GBA Season 8, let us know in the comments. Again, we always promote conversation, so if you guys want to talk about something that maybe we missed or something you feel like we misspoke about, go ahead and let us know, as long as it's in a calm manner. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next week. Peace.
See ya.